The Husbands by Chandler Baker. Is it a modern day Stepford Wives, except geared towards husbands? Let's talk about it. As soon as I finished The Husbands by Chandler Baker, I knew I would have to come talk to you guys about it. Not only does it pack a good story in there, but it also takes on pretty heavy subjects such as gender roles, the impact of the COVID pandemic on working moms, and also it is kind of a throwback to the Stepford Wives. But we'll get to all that. First, let me give you a quick rundown of the plot. Just a warning, it may get possibly a little bit spoilery just by nature of what I'm discussing here, so proceed at your own caution. I won't give away any major plot points, but just the comparisons that I'm making will possibly be a little bit spoilery, so you've been warned. It follows a couple named Nora and Hayden. Nora is an attorney trying to become partner. She's also pregnant. They're already parents to a toddler named Liv. With their family expanding, they need to get a bigger house, and they need to do it pretty quick because the pregnancy has put sort of this ticking time bomb, for lack of a better term, on the situation. So in their house searching, they come across this beautiful, gorgeous, perfect house in what seems to be a beautiful, gorgeous, perfect community. It's full of other amazing women, high-powered, great at their jobs, and they welcome Nora into the fold and start inviting her to all sorts of different outings and community events and almost courting her to become part of the community, just as she is trying to court them to let her in. Meanwhile, Nora is tired. And when I say tired, I mean she is tired. The challenges of being a full-time working mom, plus having a toddler, plus having a husband who, while he means well, doesn't really help to the level that he thinks that he does, makes the amount of stress that Nora is under just magnified, magnified, magnified. There's also the mental weight of everything, running the family that is pretty much on Nora's shoulders. And as much as she tries to off-source it to her husband, it just he doesn't really take up the mantle enough for her to be able to do that. So whenever she starts to see these wives and their husbands who say things like, oh, you work so hard, and exchange tips with one another about getting stains out of clothes, and always have snacks ready for these ladies get-togethers and keep the house immaculate, when Nora sees that happening among the women in this community, it sure does seem appetizing. It makes her own struggles stand out in that much more of a stark relief in comparison. Now let's talk about the pandemic. In the introduction, Chandler Baker dedicates the book to all the women out there who are struggling to just keep it together, and points out that while women can do anything, they can't do everything. And I think it's this push to try and do everything and be everything that has really put women in this spot of feeling like there's this ideal that's even more and more and more unattainable, even more impossible for us to reach because we just can't. We can't. So when you look at all the studies, the COVID pandemic has disproportionately impacted working moms. And I know that as I say this, there are going to be people who don't fall into that demographic who will instantly be feeling like they're put on the defensive. And that's not the intention of this discussion at all. I definitely don't want to overlook the wonderful contributions that dads make and that stay-at-home moms make. All of you guys are awesome. You're awesome. This discussion is particularly about working moms, though, and the impact that the COVID pandemic had on it, which is statistically shown to be disproportionately bad. The New York Times published an excellent series called The Primal Scream about this very topic, talking about moms who were trying to do everything during the pandemic because workplaces were closed. They had to either be out of work or do remote work from home. Daycares were closed, schools were closed, so they had to either take care of their young children or handle schoolwork at home while working full-time at home. I was one of those working moms during that time. They basically had to be everything during this time, and it was just so overwhelming and so constant, and So difficult. And when push came to shove, because women, even when they're working full time, traditionally, not always, but traditionally, still take on the majority of the family caregiver role, when all of that stuff went down during the COVID pandemic, working moms were the ones who really disproportionately took the brunt of all of that, because all those caregiving responsibilities and all those work responsibilities were coexisting at the same time, plus teaching responsibilities. Now, again, I want to point out that dads had the same situation if they were home with the kids, and also stay-at-home moms. I have a very close person to me who is a stay-at-home mom, and the pandemic really cemented in her mind that she cannot return to the workforce because with her little kids, she had to be a full-time teacher, and it was so intense that there's no way she could have held a job during that. Now, just a caveat I want to put out there. I come at this from a place of extreme privilege. I have a great job and I had no furloughs. I was able to immediately work from home, and so was my entire team through the entire pandemic. Great, great news. And also, my kids are old enough that they were able to pretty much direct themselves through all of their schoolwork. However, was it still hard for me? Incredibly, incredibly difficult. I had it easy. I was one of the people who had it easy. And so to think about all the working moms and all the working parents who had it even harder, whose kids were too small and needed constant supervision, or people who were furloughed or laid off during the pandemic and had no paycheck and had to worry about that. Even knowing how hard it was for me, despite all of the privileges that I had during the pandemic, to think about the way it was for a lot of people who are struggling a lot more is just, it was a time. It was a time, and it still continues to be. In fact, for myself, the reverberations are still reverberating. A lot of women had to leave the workforce as a result, because when something had to give, it was the mom. It just opens up a lot of discussion about gender roles within the household, and then how that fits into being a working parent as well, especially when you throw in feminism and women's liberation. Women's liberation meant having choices, being able to go to the work site. It didn't mean keeping all of the household duties and then adding on full-time work on top of that. It didn't mean constantly carrying the mental weight of everything having to do with caregiving in addition to working full-time. Now, again, I'm not trying to make generalities about men or their place in the familial structure, but when it comes to gender roles, particularly in America, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, a lot of the caregiving still traditionally falls on the woman's shoulders, which makes it really interesting when you're adding a full-time job on top of that. So hopefully I didn't get too many people riled up with that discussion, but it just made me think a lot, the husbands did, about that dynamic and how COVID changed it and how COVID kind of threw it into the spotlight, and how it's kind of impacted the women's movement for the worse. Okay, moving right along, let's talk about the Stepford Wives. This is where the discussion may get slightly spoilery. Again, I'm not going to give away any major plot points, but just the fact that we're talking about the Stepford Wives is within itself a major plot point. But I have to talk about it. I have to. I can't not talk about it. So let's talk about it. Ira Levin wrote a book called The Stepford Wives in 1972, and at the time it was so controversial, and even today continues to be controversial. Very interesting book about this woman who's a stay-at-home mom, as most women were at that time, and they moved to this new community, and she suddenly realizes that all the women in the community are absolutely perfect. They're beautiful, their houses are immaculate, they're pleasing and pleasant, and it's just not exactly what this woman is. And so a similar thing happens in The Husbands by Chandler Baker, except with the genders flipped. So when Nora goes to this new neighborhood, she notices that all the husbands are kind and accommodating to their wives. The houses are spotless. There's always a meal ready. They do all the household chores. They compliment the women on how hard they work. The main difference is that in the Stepford Wives, the women were basically doing whatever they were already doing. It's just now they were doing it perfectly and with a smile. Contrast that to the husbands, where the main objective is just to make the men help. To make them help. The women were still doing things, but now the men were stepping in to do more. All right, I've got my handy dandy phone and old lady reading glasses so I can read you a quote from each book so you can kind of see a little bit of the different feel that each had. Here's one from The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. What's wrong with Bill McCormick? Can't he run a washer? I thought he was one of our aerospace brains. He's taking care of Marge, Kit said, folding the t-shirt. These things came out nice and white, didn't they? She put the folded t-shirt into the laundry basket, smiling, like an actress in a commercial. That's what she was, Joanna felt suddenly. That's what they all were. All the Stepford Wives, actresses in commercials, pleased with detergents and floor wax, with cleaners, shampoos, and deodorants. Pretty actresses, big in the bosom but small in the talent, playing suburban housewives unconvincingly, too nicey nice to be real. So, I mean, basically it's the stuff that the woman already does, except she's doing it super nicely, super beautifully. It consumes her entire world. That's all she is. She just fits into that mold and nothing else. Contrast it with the husbands. Here's a scene from Nora before all of the hullabaloo started, just to show some of the struggle that Nora was going through as a working mom. She walks back upstairs, still in her high heels, wondering how she could be so eager to see her family, her favorite faces in the entire world, yet also feel a horror movie level of dread. Don't go in there. She can't even say that these warring emotions are in equal measure. It's more like they overlap, the perfect Venn diagram. The things she loves and those that drive her to madness are the exact same. Hayden watches the news while Liv scribbles with a marker on a notepad. Is it smart to let our 4-year-old draw with marker on the carpet? Nora keeps her voice light, an honest question, but inwardly she cringes. She might have started with hello or how was your day? Might have kissed him on the forehead like a good wife. They're washable. Hayden peers down his nose at Liv, as though he has the whole situation firmly under his grasp. Yeah, Nora kneels and starts gently capping the markers, praying that Liv won't notice and throw a fit. But who's going to wash the carpet? Hayden sighs. So it really shows the disparity. It's not like the husbands were doing all of this stuff before in either book. It's always been the wives. It's just a matter of how they did it. So super interesting book. It went a little bit off the rails at the end there, but that's not the part that really grabbed me the most. It was more the concept of thinking about these working moms and thinking about the pandemic and the effect that it had on every working parent out there, and also the dynamic between men and women and what women in the workplace are still coming up against. So, super interesting book, and I may have touched on a touchy subject. Hopefully, I handled it with enough equanimity that there is a thoughtful discussion in the comments and not a bunch of people coming out to say what about isms, but we'll see. Thanks so much for watching as always, and I will talk to you guys later. I can't wait to see what you think. Oh, what year was it written? Alexa, what year was The Stepford Wives written?
Here's something I found on the web. According to bestsellerauthor.com, entitled Tests for Husbands and Wives, with the preset separate sections for men and women, and was published in 1939.
Alexa, what year did Ira Levin write The Stepford Wives?
Sorry, I don't know that one.
Alexa, what year was the book The Stepford Wives published?
The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin was published in September 1972. By the way,